I only married you because I felt sorry for you.
The room erupted in applause, glass walls shimmering, lights sweeping across hundreds of faces, just as Ethan Cole finished thanking everyone for 5 years of building Nova Reach from nothing. Cameras flashed. Employees cheered. It should have been the proudest moment of his life. But then, with the microphone still hot and the entire company watching, his wife leaned in, smiling like a woman delivering a toast, and whispered a sentence that sliced straight through him. I only married you because I felt sorry for you. The applause died mid-echo. 100 conversations froze. Ethan felt the world tilt, as if someone had ripped the floor out from under him. Why would she say that? Why now? And why? Did it sound rehearsed? He stood there, shattered, unaware that this single moment was only the beginning, that beneath the success, the marriage, and the company he built, a far darker truth had been quietly waiting to surface. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Ethan couldn't sleep the night after the company anniversary. The sentence kept replaying in his mind, echoing through the hollowed-out corridors of his memory like a cruel refrain. I only married you because I felt sorry for you. But long before humiliation became a public spectacle, long before he built Nova Reach into a name people respected, there had been a different Ethan one who lived in the shadow of a life that always seemed just a little too big for him. He grew up in Brindleford, a small industrial town that smelled of metal and wet asphalt. His mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, while he spent evenings huddled beside an old desktop computer salvaged from a scrap sale. That machine was his escape. When the world outside felt too loud, too demanding, code felt safe, predictable, fair, unlike real life. There had never been much money, never enough warmth either. His father walked out when Ethan was 9, but the emptiness he left behind was older than that. Ethan carried it everywhere, into school, into friendships, into every decision that came after. A quiet belief that he simply wasn't someone worth staying for. As an adult, the belief didn't disappear. It evolved. It became humility, then self-doubt, then a strange mixture of drive and desperation. He wanted to build something great, not just to succeed, but to prove he wasn't the lost cause his past whispered he might be. In his early 20s, he moved to the city with nothing but an idea for an analytics platform and a few $100s. The room he rented was barely the size of a walk-in closet. The walls were thin, the heater broken, the nights long. Yet Ethan coded through it all, through failures, through rejections, through the silence of investors who didn't see what he saw. There were days he skipped meals just to afford another month of hosting services. Nights when he fell asleep on the floor beside his laptop, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. He lived on instant noodles and hope, and some days even hope felt too expensive. Then came the pitch nights, bright rooms with sharper people. He walked into each one, armed with statistics and passion, only to meet the same polite dismissal, promising, but not investable. Come back when you have traction. We're focusing on founders with stronger business backgrounds. They meant someone else, someone not like him, someone who didn't walk in wearing a suit bought from a thrift store with sleeves slightly too long. Ethan swallowed each rejection quietly, pretending it didn't sting, pretending he didn't notice investors shaking hands with founders who looked more polished, more connected, more confident. He wondered, sometimes, if brilliance would ever outweigh background. That was the version of Ethan standing alone at a small tech accelerator event the night he first saw her. Lila Hart. She walked in as though she owned the entire room, elegant, composed, heels striking the polished floor with the precision of a woman who had never been told no in her life. Her dress was tailored, her posture flawless, her eyes sharp and searching. She moved through groups of people easily, smiling, the kind of smile that suggested she already understood everything before you even spoke. People noticed her immediately. Investors greeted her, founders straightened their backs. Conversations shifted when she passed by. Ethan watched from a distance, not because he was intimidated, though he was, but because she felt like a different category of human altogether. Someone built from finer materials. He expected her gaze to slide past him, but it didn't. Instead, she stopped at his pitch table, the one nobody visited except out of courtesy. She picked up his prototype tablet, brows lifting slightly in intrigue. "You built this alone?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, confident, but there was an undertone of genuine curiosity. Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of the way his heartbeat surged. "Yeah, still working on a few features, but the core model is stable." She tested the interface, silent for a moment. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. "You're underselling yourself," she said simply. Nobody had ever said that to him before. Not like that. Not with certainty strong enough to shake him. She introduced herself as a finance consultant with experience in scaling early-stage companies. Ethan didn't know it then, but she had already gained a reputation in certain circles for transforming rough talent into polished success stories. Some called her brilliant, some called her ruthless. Ethan didn't know either version. He only knew that she was the first person who saw potential in him without asking for proof. The conversation shifted quickly from polite interest to something deeper, more engaging. She challenged him intellectually, questioned his assumptions, pushed him to articulate the purpose behind his product. Hours passed without him noticing. At the end of the night, she said something that stayed with him for years. "With the right guidance, you could change the landscape of data analytics, but you need someone who can help you structure your brilliance." Guidance, structure, brilliance. He held on to those words like they were salvation. Leela offered to meet again to discuss strategy, funding pathways, and long-term vision. Ethan left the event feeling weightless, hopeful in a way he hadn't been for years. Their partnership began as late-night whiteboard sessions in cheap cafes and cramped co-working spaces. Lila dove into the business side, while Ethan built the technology. She introduced him to investors who previously ignored him. She taught him how to pitch with clarity, how to answer questions without shrinking, how to believe in his own ideas. She didn't just support him, she elevated him. And Ethan mistook elevation for affection, mistook admiration for love, mistook her attention for something personal, something tender. The truth was more complicated. One night, after a successful investor meeting, they shared a quiet moment on a rooftop overlooking the city lights. Ethan admitted he never imagined someone like her would even notice someone like him. Leela had smiled softly then, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You deserve more than you think, Ethan," she whispered. "You just need someone who believes in you." Those words cracked something open inside him. That was the beginning not of love, perhaps, but of dependency, a subtle but powerful shift. He leaned on her for confidence, direction, validation. Lila didn't discourage it. She guided, corrected, sculpted. Ethan convinced himself that she was his missing piece. He didn't see the imbalance building beneath the surface. Didn't see how every compliment came with a quiet recalibration of control. Didn't see that the line between partnership and possession was thinner than he realized. By the time Nova Reach gained traction, Lila wasn't just part of the company, she was part of his identity. Ethan believed he owed her everything. The connections, the funding, the stability, the future. So when she suggested taking on a more official role as CFO, he didn't hesitate. When she asked for additional shares to streamline decision-making, he signed them over. When she started rewriting his pitch speeches, he let her, because he believed she was the reason he got this far. Looking back now, standing in the ruins of his humiliation, Ethan could see what he never allowed himself to before. He hadn't fallen in love with Leela. He had fallen in love with the version of himself he thought she made possible. And somewhere in the middle of climbing toward her world, he had forgotten the boy in Brindleford, the one who built things from nothing, the one who didn't need anyone's pity. But he didn't know that yet. Not fully, not until the night she shattered him in front of everyone. Not until the investigation began. Not until he discovered the truth behind her guidance. For now, he only felt the ache of betrayal, not knowing it was merely the first layer. The beginning of their romance wasn't marked by fireworks or confessions whispered under the stars. It unfolded quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a soft tide that gradually erodes the shoreline, until one day, the land looks entirely different and you can't remember when it changed. After weeks of working together, it felt natural for Ethan and Lila to drift into conversations that weren't strictly about business. Sometimes they stayed late after meetings, eating takeout on the floor of their tiny office as they discussed dreams, failures, and the versions of themselves they wished they could become. Ethan shared stories he'd never told anyone, stories of growing up without heat in the winter, of failing exams because he worked nights, of feeling like life was something that happened to other people. He didn't know why the words poured out, maybe because Lila listened without judgment, her sharp eyes softening in a way that made him feel seen. One night, he realized he was looking at her differently, with a kind of admiration that sat too close to longing. He suppressed it. She was out of his league. She was powerful, established, always so composed. He was a guy still trying to convince a landlord not to raise his rent. But if Ethan was subtle, Lila was impossible to read. She treated him with a blend of tenderness and authority, comforting him when he doubted himself, pushing him harder when he hesitated. Her attention made him feel chosen, special. He didn't notice how often she chose the direction of their conversations, or how she corrected him gently but persistently, until he began to echo her way of thinking without realizing it. At a small investor event, someone introduced them as co-founders. Leela didn't correct him. Ethan smiled. Something shifted between them, unspoken but undeniable. Their first kiss happened on a night of exhaustion and triumph. They just secured the company's first major seed investment after months of scraping by. Ethan had stumbled out of the meeting with tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, joy and disbelief mixing into something overwhelming. Lila followed him outside, placed a hand on his cheek, and whispered, "See, I told you you could do this." He didn't remember who leaned in first, only the warmth of her lips, the faint scent of jasmine, and the quiet thought that maybe life had finally decided to offer him a miracle. From that moment, their relationship intensified. They became inseparable, working together, dining together, talking until sunrise. Ethan felt like he was stepping into a world where he finally belonged, a world shaped by Lila, but one where he was allowed to stand beside her. But love built on gratitude is a fragile thing. Lila's friends from her elite social circle reacted to Ethan with polite curiosity, followed by thinly veiled surprise when they learned he was her boyfriend. He wasn't what they expected. They spoke about vacations and designer brands. Ethan talked about coding challenges and affordable ramen restaurants. Sometimes they laughed at his jokes. Sometimes they laughed at him. Lila usually stepped in to redirect the conversation, but occasionally, she let the laughter linger a beat too long. Her smile strained. Ethan tried not to notice. He reminded himself that he was lucky, blessed, even to have someone as exceptional as Lila by his side. So he began to change, subtly, deliberately. He adjusted the way he dressed, adopting the sleek, minimalist outfits she favored. He practiced speaking more confidently, mirroring the cadence of her business partners. He attended networking events he hated, smiled through condescension, and followed her lead without question. When she suggested he move into her upscale apartment, Ethan agreed immediately. His old place felt like a chapter he was desperate to close. Living with her felt like stepping into a future he believed he didn't deserve. But the apartment never quite felt like home. Leela's decor was pristine, curated, almost sterile white marble, chrome accents, black and white photographs of skylines, no family photos, no sentimental trinkets, nothing with a story attached. She once told Ethan that clutter reflected indecision, and she didn't tolerate indecision. Ethan stored most of his belongings in a closet, telling himself he preferred it that way. But sometimes, late at night, he'd open the closet door and stare at the worn notebook he used to sketch product ideas in, now left untouched. Whenever he doubted these changes, Lila reassured him. You're evolving, Ethan. Growth means letting go of old habits. And Ethan believed her, believed that her guidance was shaping him into the best version of himself. But sometimes, the guidance felt like correction. Sometimes, admiration felt like management. Once, during a dinner with investors, Ethan made a joke that Lila deemed too casual. Afterward, she told him with a gentle smile, You're brilliant, but you're not used to rooms like that. Let me help you navigate them. He thanked her. He always thanked her, because he didn't see the pattern woven through her kindness, the subtle reinforcement of a narrative where she was the caretaker of his potential, the architect of his future, the one who had saved him. There were tender moments too, nights when she held him as he described the fear of failing, mornings when she kissed his forehead before an important meeting, times when her smile felt genuine and warm, reminding him why he had fallen in love. Those moments made everything else blend into the background, made him forget the brief flashes of condescension, the controlling decisions disguised as concern, the quiet looks she exchanged with her friends when Ethan mispronounced a French wine name. He mistook her superiority for safety. He mistook her confidence for love, and he mistook his dependence for connection. When Ethan proposed, he didn't choose a fancy restaurant or a dramatic gesture. He proposed in their living room, holding the simple silver ring he could afford. His hands shook. His voice caught. He expected Lila to be surprised, maybe moved. But she didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. She said yes immediately, with a smile that was beautiful but practiced. She kissed him, hugged him, whispered, I always knew you'd ask. The wedding was lavish, orchestrated almost entirely by Lila's family. Ethan's mother cried through the ceremony not because her son was marrying the love of his life, but because she couldn't believe he belonged in such an extravagant world. Ethan felt small that day, but he convinced himself it was awe, gratitude, joy, too big to hold. During the reception, he overheard one of Lila's aunts whisper to another guest, She's always had such a generous heart, taking on someone like him. He pretended he didn't hear it, pretended he didn't see Lila choose not to correct them, pretended the knot in his chest was happiness choking him. Their honeymoon was perfect sunsets on the coast, wine tastings, whispered promises about the future. Ethan clung to those moments, storing them like evidence, in case he ever doubted her love. But even then, small cracks appeared, a comment here, a dismissal there, little reminders of where they each came from. Once, while walking along the beach, Leela laughed and said, You know, if I hadn't found you when I did, you'd probably still be eating cup noodles and pitching to empty rooms. She said it lightly, like a joke, but something inside Ethan tightened. He laughed anyway, because at that time, he still believed she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He couldn't see that she had started constructing a narrative long before that moment. One where she was the savior, and he was the fortunate one. He didn't see that she wasn't building a marriage, she was building a story, and he was the character she needed to play her part. Years later, when she whispered that cruel sentence into a live microphone, the story shattered. But the truth had been cracking long before. He just hadn't learned to hear it yet. Nova Reach did not rise overnight, but when it finally did, it rose with the force of something that had been waiting beneath the surface, like a tide gathering strength in silence. Ethan still remembered the early mornings when the office lights flickered on before sunrise, illuminating whiteboards filled with scribbles only he and Lila could decipher. Back then, it felt like they were partners in a heist against fate itself. Every breakthrough, every signed deal, every small victory felt like another brick placed in the foundation of the life they were building. But as the company grew, something subtle began to shift quietly at first. Then unmistakably, in the early days, Ethan was the face of the product. Investors admired his technical brilliance. Media outlets praised his innovative vision. But Lila quickly became the face of the company, the polished strategist who charmed investors and reshaped financial models with the ease of someone playing a familiar game. Ethan didn't mind. He liked being behind the scenes. He assumed they were simply playing to each other's strengths. But he didn't notice how the spotlight lingered longer on her every time, or how she began correcting him in public, lightly, subtly, wrapped in humor that softened the sting but never erased it. During one board meeting, Ethan suggested delaying a product rollout until QA finished a more thorough review. Lila placed a gentle hand on his arm and smiled at the board. What my dear husband means is that he's cautious by nature. But rest assured, I've already coordinated risk mitigation. We're moving forward. The room nodded, trusting her confidence over his caution. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, but he swallowed it. She wasn't dismissing him, she was clarifying, helping, guiding. That was what he told himself. He didn't notice Marcus, sitting across the table, frowning slightly as though he wanted to speak but knew better. It wasn't just meetings. It was the day-to-day rhythm of their lives. Leela started choosing his clothes for major events. This color makes you look more authoritative. She edited his emails. Investors respond better when the language is less emotional. She rehearsed his speeches with him, stopping him mid-sentence to adjust his tone, posture, and pace. Ethan interpreted it as support, as love. But the distant part of him, one he didn't dare acknowledge, felt like clay, being molded by hands that didn't always care if the shaping hurt. He didn't notice how often she rolled her eyes when he expressed uncertainty, or how she praised him for having potential, the way you might encourage a child learning to ride a bicycle. Potential, not power. Promise, not presence. Then came the media features. The first major magazine piece about Nova Reach included a 2-page spread on Lila. Her photograph poised, commanding, immaculate, covered nearly half the layout. Ethan's picture appeared in a corner, smaller, softer, captioned with words like humble beginnings, an origin story meant to elevate her narrative. Readers loved it, and why wouldn't they? It was a beautiful story. The brilliant financier who helped a struggling genius rise to the top, the woman who saw value in an underdog and turned him into a success. It was inspirational. It also wasn't entirely true. Ethan built Nova Reach long before she entered the picture, but the lines blurred as the story spread, reshaped by media, reinforced by Lila's effortless charisma. He told himself the details didn't matter, that the mission mattered more than the narrative, that he didn't need the credit. But sometimes, late at night, he caught himself reading those articles twice, searching for the parts that mentioned him, clinging to them like a reminder that he still belonged in the company he created. As the company expanded, Leela's influence deepened. She hired senior executives without consulting him, justifying it as moving fast to keep up with growth. She met privately with investors, tailoring strategies that Ethan often learned about afterward in brief summaries. She said it was because he was too busy innovating. He tried to believe that, but the truth gnawed at him. She had begun shaping not just his public image, but his role within the company. The first crack became visible during a quarterly strategy meeting. The room was filled with board members, department heads, and advisors. Ethan had stayed up all night preparing a thoughtful roadmap for R&D expansion. When he finished his presentation, the room responded with polite applause. But before he could answer questions, Leela stood, placing her hand on the back of his chair like she was steadying him. "Let's simplify that," she said warmly. "What Ethan is trying to say is..." He stopped listening. The words blurred into background noise. All he could hear was the subtext. "He can't explain it himself. He needs me. I saved him once, and I'm still saving him." He felt Marcus's eyes on him again, concerned, cautious, but Ethan forced a smile, nodding along as though he agreed with everything she said. By the end of the meeting, his roadmap had been streamlined to half its original scope, and Lila received a round of applause for clarity and leadership. It is recess. The distance between them grew outside the office as well. They spent fewer evenings together, When Ethan suggested a date night, Lila usually responded with, "I'm swamped, maybe next week." When they did have dinner, the conversation drifted to business updates, performance metrics, or upcoming deals. Rarely to dreams, rarely to feelings, never to him. He started noticing her late nights, the whispered phone calls, the way her expression would shift into irritation when he walked into the room unexpectedly. She always explained it away. Just work stuff. Just dealing with investors. Just tired. Ethan believed her. Or rather, he chose to, because the alternative that she was drifting away, that something was breaking, was too painful to consider. He remembered one particular evening vividly. He had returned home early, carrying a bouquet of simple wildflowers he picked up on a whim. They reminded him of their early days, when life felt less complicated and their bond felt more real. When he opened the apartment door, Lila was in the living room, her voice low and clipped as she spoke on the phone. "No, Damien, I can handle it. Yes, but Ethan doesn't need to be involved in every decision." Ethan froze. Before he could process the words, Lila ended the call and turned to him with a practiced smile. "You're home early." He held out the flowers. She blinked slowly, like she wasn't sure what to do with them. "They're lovely," she said, placing them on the counter without looking at them again. The bouquet wilted by morning. She never put them in water. That night, Ethan lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering when he started feeling like an accessory in his own marriage, wondering if she even noticed the way he sank deeper into himself each passing day. But the next morning, she kissed him on the cheek before leaving for work, and he convinced himself everything was fine, that he was overthinking. That love always changed with time. He didn't know then that this wasn't change. It was erosion, and he didn't yet understand that the woman he once believed was his savior had already begun building a future that didn't include him at the top. The clues were there. He just wasn't ready to see them. Not until the night she humiliated him in front of the people who once admired him. Not until the unraveling began. The distance between Ethan and Lila didn't arrive with an explosion. It seeped into their marriage quietly, like cold air slipping through the cracks of a window he thought was sealed. The signs were small at first, so small Ethan convinced himself they were temporary. Consequences of stress, signs of ambition, symptoms of success. But small things accumulate, and eventually, the weight becomes impossible to ignore. Their mornings used to begin with warmth, soft greetings, shared coffee, lazy smiles. Now, they began with silence. Lila woke earlier and left without saying much, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors as she rushed out the door. Ethan often found half-finished coffees on the counter, lipstick marks left behind like traces of a life that no longer included him. He would step into the kitchen moments later, staring at the cup and wondering how something so simple, two people drinking coffee together, had slipped away without him noticing. At work, the distance deepened. They rarely arrived together anymore, rarely left together, rarely looked like the power couple people once admired. Instead, Leela moved through the office as if she were the sun and everyone else were orbiting her employees, turning their faces toward her radiance. Executives adjusting their tone when she walked by, Ethan watched from the outside, feeling less like a husband and more like a supporting character in the life she was building. Their conversations shifted too. Decisions about Novareach that once took place at their kitchen table now happened behind glass doors he wasn't invited through. Lila's office became her fortress, a place where whispered discussions with senior executives or investors happened without his input. She explained these changes by saying she wanted to shield him from unnecessary stress. Shield. The word tasted like condescension. Ethan couldn't help but notice her relationship with Damien Knox growing stronger. Damien was charismatic, confident, the kind of man who entered a room expecting everyone to adapt to him. He had a reputation ambitious, cunning, someone who saw businesses as chessboards and people as potential pieces. Ethan didn't trust him, but Lila seemed to admire him deeply. He saw them talking more often, strategizing behind closed doors, sharing late-night messages that Lila dismissed as nothing important. When Ethan once walked past her office unexpectedly, he caught a glimpse of her leaning close to Damien, pointing at a screen as they laughed softly. He froze at the doorway, watching as Damien placed a hand lightly on her shoulder just for a moment too familiar, too intimate. Lila looked up, startled, and the warmth in her expression vanished instantly, replaced by a calm, practiced smile. "Ethan," she said, "we were just going over projections for next quarter." Damien offered a polite nod, a smirk ghosting at the corner of his lips, as if he knew something Ethan didn't. Ethan forced a smile and nodded back. He wanted to ask why Damien's hand had been there, why they laughed that way, why she didn't tell him about the meeting. But the words tangled in his throat. He didn't want to seem insecure, didn't want to appear jealous or paranoid. He told himself trust was necessary in a marriage, and he trusted her. Or perhaps he trusted who he wanted her to be. Lila didn't seem bothered by his unease. If anything, she seemed slightly amused whenever he asked too many questions, gently squeezing his hand and saying, "You worry too much." The more she said it, the more he began to believe it. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe he was too emotional, too uncertain, too lacking. He had always feared he wasn't enough for her. Now, he feared she agreed. At home, the gulf widened. Dinner became a rare ritual. Conversations became shallow. Lila seemed exhausted by intimacy, uninterested in vulnerability, dismissive. When Ethan tried to reach out, one evening, he made her dinner, a simple roasted salmon, her favorite. He lit candles, hoping to recreate the warmth they once shared. When she arrived home, he rushed to greet her, excitement flickering in his chest. But Lila barely acknowledged the effort. "I already ate," she said, sliding off her heels. "Damien and I had to stay late to finalize the proposal. We grabbed something after." Ethan's heart sank. The food grew cold. The candles burned low. He sat alone at the table, stabbing at his untouched dinner, telling himself it didn't matter, that she was just tired, just busy, just trying to do what was best for their company. But deep down, something hollow opened inside him, something he didn't yet have the courage to name. Even Marcus noticed the change. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, Marcus pulled Ethan aside into a quiet hallway. "You okay, man?" Marcus asked, concern carving lines into his forehead. "You've been distant." Ethan forced a laugh. "I'm fine, just tired." Marcus studied him carefully. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you and Lila, and it's not my place to pry. But if you ever need to talk—" "I'm fine," Ethan interrupted, a little too quickly. Marcus hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, okay? Don't shut people out." But that was the thing, Ethan wasn't shutting people out. He was shrinking, folding into himself, becoming smaller, quieter, less visible in his own life. The company events that once felt celebratory now felt like stages where he performed the role of grateful husband next to Lila's dazzling presence. She answered questions on his behalf, guided conversations with a firm hand on his back, correcting him with a gentle laugh whenever he spoke out of turn. Employees eventually looked to her for approval, decisions, direction. Ethan watched as she gradually became the gravitational center of Nova Reach, while he drifted farther into the periphery. But the most painful moment came unexpectedly during a private leadership meeting. Ethan had arrived slightly late. When he walked in, Lila and Damien were already deep in conversation with a group of executives. A slide projected onto the wall displayed a strategic outline for restructuring leadership roles. He scanned the list and felt the air leave his lungs. His name wasn't on it. Not as CEO, not as founder, not anywhere. Before he could speak, Damien tapped the pointer against the screen and said casually, "This new structure will streamline decision-making. We need leaders who can execute at scale." The implication was clear. Ethan stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. Why wasn't I informed about these discussions? The room fell silent. Lila answered before anyone else. Ethan, we've all been worried about your stress levels. You've been overwhelmed. This was meant to support you. Support, shield, help you evolve. Words she used to care for him. Now, they felt like weapons dipped in sugar. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. I'm still the CEO, he said quietly. Lila's expression softened in a way that felt crueler than anger. Of course you are, she replied. But leadership is about knowing when to step back for the good of the company. Damien nodded, smirking as if Ethan's discomfort were a predictable outcome. Ethan left the meeting with his chest tight, his hands shaking. He walked down the hallway, struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. He was losing his marriage. He was losing his company. And he wasn't sure which loss hurt more. That night, he sat in the dark living room long after Lila fell asleep. He replayed every moment of the past few months, every dismissal disguised as love, every decision made without him, every whisper between her and Damien. A truth he wasn't ready to accept hovered at the edge of his mind. Maybe she didn't just fall out of love. Maybe she never truly loved him at all. Maybe he had been chosen. Not as an equal, but as a project she was finally finished with. And the worst part, he still wanted to believe she cared. The night before the company's 5th anniversary celebration should have been a milestone, a moment Ethan could look back on with pride. Nova Reach had grown beyond anything he ever imagined in those early days of coding in a cramped apartment. Yet instead of excitement, he felt something heavy pressing against his ribs, a quiet dread building beneath his skin. The celebration was Lila's idea. She insisted it would reinforce investor confidence and reposition the company for the next phase. Everything she touched lately seemed to revolve around restructuring, rebranding, redirecting, words that made Ethan uneasy without understanding why. He entered the living room, holding a draft of his speech, hoping she would approve it. He had spent hours crafting it, wanting to tell the story of resilience, gratitude, and the unlikely rise of a small startup founded by a nobody. It was sentimental, maybe too personal, but it was honest. His story, their story, at least the version he believed in. Lila was standing by the window, framed by the city lights, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm, clipped, measured. Ethan hesitated before approaching, recognizing the tone she used when she didn't want to be interrupted. Yes, I'll handle it, she murmured. He'll follow my lead. He always does. Ethan froze. He didn't mean to listen. He didn't want to. But the words slipped into him like splinters. There was a pause, then Lila laughed softly, a sound he hadn't heard directed at him in months. No, he won't push back. He just needs direction. His breath caught. Direction. Handling. Following her lead, the way she spoke about him, as though he were an obligation, a task, a variable in an equation she alone controlled, sent a tremor through his chest. He stepped back instinctively, bumping into the side table. The lamp wobbled, the sound giving him away. Lila turned sharply, ending the call without a goodbye. Oh, she said, her expression smoothing instantly into something unreadable. You're home earlier than I expected. I, wanted to go over the speech with you, Ethan said. Lifting the papers slightly, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, let me see. He handed her the speech. She skimmed through the first few paragraphs, her expression tightening with each line. Ethan? No. Everyone? He blinked. What do you mean, no? This is too emotional, she said, tapping the paper with her finger. Too personal. You're the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, not a storyteller begging for sympathy. Investors don't want to hear about hardships. They want confidence. But it's our journey, he said softly. It's honest. It's unprofessional, she corrected. And frankly, it makes you look weak. The words hit him harder than she likely intended, or maybe exactly as she intended. Weak, he repeated quietly. She sighed, as if the conversation were exhausting her. Look, Ethan, you have a tendency to lead with your heart. It's admirable in private, but it isn't suitable for a CEO in a public setting. Let me help you refine this. Her nails tapped the paper again as she spoke, marking the sections she wanted removed. Nearly all of them. He watched her cross out line after line, each stroke cutting away pieces of himself. The speech no longer felt like his. It felt like another script she wanted him to memorize, like the ones she'd coached him through at investor events. He swallowed the ache rising in his throat. I just wanted it to feel sincere. Sincerity doesn't close deals, she replied, standing. Precision does. He followed her to the kitchen counter, where she poured herself a glass of wine. For a moment, Ethan thought about asking her what the phone call had been, about who she was speaking to, why she spoke of him that way, but fear tangled with exhaustion, trapping the words behind his teeth. Instead, he forced a small smile. I'll fix the speech. Lila nodded. Good. She kissed him on the cheek light, perfunctory, detached, before heading to the bedroom. Ethan stood in the kitchen long after she disappeared down the hallway, staring at the half-empty glass she left behind. He rewrote the speech again, stripping away every vulnerable detail until the words felt hollow. He stared at the page, feeling like he'd lost something important without knowing exactly what. Later that night, unable to sleep, he wandered into the hallway. Lila's office door was slightly ajar, the blue glow of her laptop slipping into the hall. He hesitated, then approached quietly. Inside, Lila sat with Damien on a video call. Ethan couldn't make out everything, but he heard enough. Tomorrow is crucial, Damien said. Once the board sees the shift in dynamics, the transition will be smoother. Ethan won't question it, Lila replied confidently. He's overwhelmed. He needs guidance, and I'll provide it. This is what's best for the company. Damien smirked. For the company, yes. A cold pressure tightened around Ethan's lungs. He stepped back slowly, the hallway spinning for a moment. Transition, shift in dynamics, guidance. Best for the company. They were planning something that involved him stepping aside. He didn't know whether to feel betrayed or foolish. For not realizing sooner, he returned to the bedroom quietly. Lying beside Lila as she slept peacefully beside him, he stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. He wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. He wanted to pretend he hadn't heard anything at all. He wanted to run. He wanted to hold her. He didn't know which instinct belonged to his heart and which belonged to his fear. The next morning, the tension remained unspoken. Lila behaved as if nothing had happened, moving through her routine with mechanical calm. She reminded him to wear the navy suit she picked, to keep his speech short, and to avoid getting emotional in front of the cameras. He nodded weakly, feeling more like an accessory than a partner. During the car ride to the event, Ethan glanced at her profile, the flawless makeup, the perfect hair, the steady confidence. She looked like a woman completely in control, but he wasn't sure whether that made him feel safe or suffocated. She caught him staring and offered a small, practiced smile. Everything will go smoothly, she assured him. Just follow my lead. Follow my lead. He looked out the window, the city lights blurring as they drove. For the first time, he wondered whether he had followed her so far he no longer remembered the path he once walked alone. That night, as he stood backstage preparing for his speech, Ethan felt the weight of everything that led him there. The eroded intimacy, the quiet dismissals, the decisions made without him, the whispers behind closed doors. He felt small in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. He didn't know it then, but the humiliation awaiting him that night would be the moment everything broke. Lila's whispered sentence, captured by microphones, echoed across the room, wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was the final confirmation of a truth Ethan had been refusing to see. He had married a woman who didn't see him as a partner. She saw him as a project she believed she had the right to complete or to discard. And tomorrow, when the world replayed that clip endlessly, Ethan would have no choice but to face the reality he had been avoiding. Everything was about to unravel, and he had no idea just how deep the betrayal went. The applause was still fading when Ethan stepped off the stage, but to him, it felt like it had stopped hours ago. Every clapping hand sounded like an echo of the same sentence, repeating over and over. I only married you because I felt sorry for you. His chest felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out his insides, leaving only a tight, buzzing emptiness. He could still see the stunned faces in the crowd: employees, investors, partners, each one frozen between confusion and pity. Some stared at him with sympathy, others with something sharper, like disappointment, and a few with the quiet thrill of witnessing a public downfall. The cameras had caught everything. He had seen the little red recording lights pointed at him from the edge of the stage. A dozen phones lifted at once, capturing his humiliation from every angle. He could barely breathe. He stepped into the hallway behind the event hall and leaned against the wall, his palms pressed into the cold plaster as he tried to steady himself. His vision blurred, then cleared, then blurred again. He wasn't sure if he was about to collapse or scream. Footsteps approached, light and quick. Marcus appeared first, his face drawn tight with worry. "Ethan," he said softly, reaching out as if approaching a wounded animal. "Hey, don't listen to that. Come on, man. Let's go somewhere quiet." But Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. His throat felt raw, as though he had swallowed something jagged. Marcus opened his mouth to say more, but then glanced behind Ethan. His expression hardened instantly. Lila was walking toward them. Her steps were calm, deliberate, almost elegant in their precision. She carried a glass of champagne, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Her eyes met Ethan's briefly, just long enough for him to search for remorse, panic, even surprise. He found none. She looked collected, composed, cold. "Ethan," she said, her tone clipped but soft enough that Marcus couldn't accuse her of cruelty. "We should talk." Marcus stepped protectively between them. "Not now. He needs space. This is between me and my husband," she replied, her gaze never leaving Ethan's face. Husband. The word sounded strange, hollow, like a title she no longer respected but still used out of convenience. Ethan took a shaky breath and wiped at the corner of his eye, pretending it was just sweat. "It's fine, Marcus," he murmured. "I'll handle it." Marcus clenched his jaw, frustration radiating off him, but he stepped back reluctantly. Lila slipped her hand around Ethan's arm, guiding him down the corridor with the same calm ease she used in business meetings. Her touch used to steady him. Now it felt like a grip meant to steer him somewhere he didn't want to go. She led him to a small backstage dressing room and closed the door behind them. The muffled sounds of celebration continued outside, like a cruel reminder of the world still spinning. While his own had just cracked wide open, Ethan stood in the center of the room, staring at the floor. Lila set her champagne down and folded her arms. "You're overreacting," she said, as if that were the most logical way to begin. He looked up sharply. "Overreacting." His voice cracked. "You know what I meant," she said. "It slipped out. I didn't intend for everyone to hear. But you did say it." The words trembled out of him. "You said you married me out of pity." She exhaled, as though his pain were an inconvenience. "Ethan, I've supported you from the beginning. You know that. You were struggling financially, emotionally, professionally. I stepped in because I believed in what you could become." "That's hardly an insult. That's not marriage," he whispered. "That's charity." Lila frowned, irritated rather than remorseful. "You're twisting my words." "No," he said, voice breaking. "I heard them clearly. So did everyone else." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by cool detachment. "Fine," she said. "You want honesty. Here it is. When we met, you were fragile. You didn't know how to navigate the world. I helped you get where you are." He stared at her, feeling his heartbeat thud painfully against his ribs. "So, what?" he asked quietly. "You think you built me? You wouldn't be CEO today if not for me." She replied simply, The room seemed to tilt. Ethan grasped the back of a chair to steady himself. Is that truly what you think of me? He asked. Lila looked at him, the way one might look at someone refusing to accept a basic fact of life. Ethan, you're brilliant, but you're not a leader. Not in the traditional sense. You're sensitive, emotional, you make decisions with your heart, not your head. I've had to guide you through almost every major step. He closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing hard. The weight of her words pressed against old wounds he'd spent years trying to hide. So I'm just inadequate. Though her tone suggested she believed it. You didn't have to, he whispered. There were many things he wanted to say in that moment. Questions he wanted to ask about Damien, about her late nights, about the meetings he wasn't invited to. But the humiliation of the night crushed all of it. The words felt too heavy to lift. Lila sighed, brushing an invisible wrinkle from her dress. Look, we're both exhausted. Let's discuss this tomorrow. Tonight is important for the company. We can't let emotions ruin it. She left before Ethan could respond. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence was suffocating. He sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. The tears he had been holding back finally escaped. Hot and relentless, he tried to stifle the sound, ashamed of his own vulnerability even when he was alone. He didn't know how long he stayed there before he forced himself to stand. When he stepped out of the room, the hallway lights felt too bright. Conversations buzzed, glasses clinked. People laughed in the distance. The world resumed, but for him, it had stopped completely. He found Marcus again, who took one look at his face and swore under his breath. Come on, Marcus said, grabbing Ethan's coat. You're not staying another minute. Ethan didn't argue. They left through a side exit, avoiding the main hall. The cold night air hit Ethan's face like a slap, grounding him just enough to walk. Marcus called a car, keeping a hand on Ethan's shoulder, as if afraid he might collapse. Neither spoke during the ride. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city blur into streaks of color. His reflection in the glass looked fragile, almost unrecognizable. When they arrived at Ethan's home, Marcus stopped him at the door. You don't deserve this, he said quietly. Whatever story she's told you about yourself, none of it's true. Ethan tried to nod, but emotion clogged his throat. Get some rest, Marcus said. Call me if you need anything. Ethan entered the apartment alone. It felt colder than usual. Bigger, emptier. He slipped off his jacket, letting it fall to the floor. His legs gave out, and he sank onto the sofa, still wearing the suit he had chosen so carefully for a night that was supposed to celebrate him. The flashing lights of the city flickered through the window. He stared at them until the tears came again, quieter this time, deeper. At some point, he whispered into the darkness. Was any of it real? He didn't expect an answer, and none came. But the silence was loud enough to speak for both of them. Tomorrow, the world would wake up to a viral clip of his humiliation. Tomorrow, whispers would become rumors, and rumors would become narratives. Tomorrow, Ethan would discover just how far Lila's plan went. He just didn't know it yet. Tonight, all he knew was that something precious had shattered, and he wasn't sure if he had the strength to pick up the pieces. Ethan didn't return to the office for 3 days after the anniversary gala. He sent a short email to the leadership team saying he was taking a brief leave due to exhaustion. The word felt like an understatement. Exhaustion implied rest could fix him, but what he felt was closer to erosion, like parts of him had been worn away, leaving unstable ground beneath his feet. He spent most of the first day on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. His mind was blank, and yet painfully full. The humiliation replayed in loops. Every whisper and every shocked face burned into his memory. He heard Lila's voice again and again, each repetition carving the words deeper. I only married you because I felt sorry for you. He told himself he'd get up eventually, do something, move, but he didn't. It wasn't until the afternoon of the second day that someone knocked on the door, firm, insistent, unwilling to leave. When Ethan opened it, Marcus stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and a look that wavered between concern and anger. "You look like hell," Marcus said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Ethan managed a weak smile. "Thanks. You eating anything?" Marcus asked, scanning the counter, the empty takeout boxes, the untouched dishes. "No." He pressed the warm coffee cup into Ethan's hand. "Start with this." They sat in silence for a moment. Ethan held the cup but didn't drink. He stared at the steam rising, as though reading something in it. Marcus exhaled heavily. "Look, I'm trying to find the right words here, but none of them seem strong enough." He paused. "What she did to you was cruel. Straight up cruel." Ethan stared at the floor. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Don't defend her." Ethan closed his eyes. "I'm not. I need to understand why." Marcus hesitated. Then he asked, voice calmer, "Has she talked to you at all since that night?" Ethan shook his head. "A short text the morning after. She said she was staying in a hotel for a few days, that we both needed space. Space, distance, time to recalibrate. Lila's favorite tools, when she wanted control without confrontation." Marcus leaned forward. "Listen, I've been trying to keep my mouth shut about this for a long time, but after what she did, Ethan, you need to see what's been happening." Ethan looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated just long enough for dread to creep into Ethan's stomach before he continued. "Things have been shifting at the office. Slowly, quietly. Meetings you should have been in but weren't invited to. Financial documents being approved without your sign-off. Hierarchy changes in teams that somehow always get pushed through by Lila or Damien." Ethan frowned. "I thought those were temporary adjustments to help with scaling." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, they're permanent, Ethan, and structured in a way that moves authority away from you." The words stunned him. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it aloud was different, like a veil ripped away, exposing the truth stark and undeniable. "I didn't know," Ethan whispered. "I know," Marcus said softly. "That's why I'm telling you." Ethan looked dazed. Why didn't anyone else say anything? Marcus hesitated. Some didn't notice, others noticed, but didn't think it was their place. And a few, well, some people benefit from aligning themselves with whoever seems to have the real power. The implication was clear. Power no longer meant Ethan. He felt a sharp, twisting pain in his chest. "Are you saying Lila's trying to push me out?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Silence stretched between them before he finally said, "I'm saying she's preparing the company for something, and whatever it is, you're not at the center of it anymore." The room felt colder. Ethan swallowed hard, gripping the coffee cup so tightly his knuckles turned white. Why would she do that? "Nova Reach is my—" He stopped, not because he didn't know the end of the sentence, but because realizing it, truly realizing it, hurt too much. Marcus hesitated again. "I didn't want to tell you this," he said quietly, "but I started noticing patterns. Files moved, access permissions altered. Subtle, not obvious. And Damien, the two of them have been acting like they run the place together." A sinking feeling settled in Ethan's stomach. "Are you saying there's something going on between them?" he asked, voice trembling. Marcus raised his hands gently. "I don't know if it's personal, but professionally, yes. They've been collaborating behind your back for months." Ethan felt his breath catch. His mind flashed back to the phone call he overheard. The late nights, the hushed conversations, the way she dismissed his concerns. "But why?" he whispered. "Why go behind my back? Why lie?" Marcus looked at him with sad eyes. "Maybe because it was easier to keep you in the dark. Maybe because she thought you'd accept anything she told you. Or maybe because she didn't want you to stand in the way of whatever plans she and Damien have." Ethan felt the world tilt, the foundations of his marriage and career shaking like loose stones underfoot. Marcus rested a hand on his shoulder. "You've trusted her more than anyone. That made you vulnerable. She knows your strengths, and she knows every place you're insecure. And she's been using both." The truth hit him like a blow, sharp, stunning, undeniable. He set the coffee down, unable to keep holding it. His hands trembled uncontrollably. After a long silence, Ethan forced himself to speak. I need to know what's going on. I can't keep pretending. Marcus nodded slowly. Then start by looking at the paperwork, the emails, the meeting notes. Follow the trail. It'll either confirm your fears or ease them. But Ethan already knew which it would be. Later, when Marcus left, Ethan stood alone in his office at home. He opened his laptop, hands still shaking, and began digging slow at first, then faster as adrenaline took over. He searched through shared drives, old email threads, financial archives. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but then he noticed patterns, tiny inconsistencies that could be dismissed individually but, together, formed a mosaic of something deliberate. Documents signed without his approval, meetings marked internal only that should have included him, budget reallocations that didn't align with his directives, new hires in upper management he never interviewed, coded financial transfers routed in strange sequences. And then he found an email chain between Lila and Damien from months ago, one he had never been included in. At first, it appeared harmless. Then a line caught his eye. Once Phase 2 is complete, transitioning leadership will be simpler. He's already showing signs of instability. L.H. Ethan felt his heart shatter. The room spun around him. Instability. A word used to undermine him. A word used to justify cutting him out. His chest tightened painfully. He scrolled further. Damien replied, Good. The board will support the shift if they believe he's not capable long term. Continue documenting. Documenting. She was documenting him, his behavior, his decisions, his vulnerabilities, evidence, weapons, a file, a case, a narrative. He slammed the laptop shut, unable to breathe. The betrayal was no longer abstract, no longer emotional. It was logistical, planned, executed, step by step. Everything suddenly made sense. The whispering, the late nights, the restructured teams, the controlled messaging, and finally, her words into the microphone. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a tactic. Because a humiliated man was easier to replace, Ethan pressed his palms into his eyes, fighting the wave of anguish, threatening to swallow him whole. He slid to the floor, his back against the wall, the realization burning through him. His marriage had not been built on love. It had been built on leverage. And now, she was pulling it away piece by piece. But beneath the devastation, something else flickered inside him. Something faint, yet stubborn, a spark. If she wanted to erase him, he needed to understand why. And more importantly, he needed to decide whether he would let her. Tonight, something inside Ethan shifted. He was no longer just hurt. He was waking up. Ethan barely slept the night he uncovered the email chain. He sat on the living room floor long after midnight, surrounded by printed documents, open tabs, and scattered notes. The more he found, the clearer the shape of the truth became. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. A methodical, premeditated plan to push him out of the company he had built from nothing. But plans like that don't form in isolation. They need structure, they need accomplices, they need motives. He started digging deeper. With trembling fingers, Ethan reopened his laptop and accessed the finance archives. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that his instincts told him the monetary trail would reveal what words had tried to hide. It didn't take long. The first anomaly he spotted was subtle. A series of microtransactions routed between different shell companies under the umbrella of Knox Capital, Damien's investment firm. Individually, they were insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern designed to go unnoticed. More importantly, many of those shell companies had recently acquired small percentages of Nova Reach stock, minuscule amounts, fractional shares, but spread across dozens of accounts. A quiet accumulation. Ethan's chest tightened. He clicked through each company name, tracing ownership. Every trail ended at the same place. Damien Knox. His breath caught as something inside him snapped into clarity. Damien was gradually buying influence in Nova Reach. without the board noticing, by distributing ownership across multiple entities. None of them triggered reporting thresholds. None seemed suspicious on paper, but combined, they gave Damien a meaningful vote, especially when paired with board members he'd already charmed or persuaded. And then there was Lila. She wasn't just aware of the transactions she had authorized. Several internal restructuring adjustments that allowed these acquisitions to slip through without cross-verification. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. It wasn't only emotional manipulation anymore. She had undermined his authority in ways he hadn't even known to guard against. He felt sick, but he wasn't done. He moved on to the board meeting minutes. Over the past 6 months, wording had changed in subtle ways. Strategic notes placed disproportionate emphasis on stability and professional polish, emotional maturity, phrases that, taken together, painted Ethan as volatile or fragile. They were building a case, a narrative. Ethan is unreliable. Ethan is unstable. Ethan is not fit to lead long term. He remembered the times he had left meetings early due to burnout, the way he had struggled through speeches that Lila rewrote, the moments he'd hesitated or doubted himself. All of them could be twisted, framed, weaponized. He had handed them ammunition without realizing it. Ethan leaned back, wiping a hand across his face. His heart pounded, every beat echoing the same question. How long had this been happening? He needed answers. Answers only one person could give, but not Leela. Not yet. Not until he understood everything she was capable of. He scrolled further through archived emails until he discovered something he'd never seen, a folder labeled Leadership Contingency Planning. It wasn't shared with him. It wasn't even tied to his permissions level. It must have been buried under administrative access, something Lila oversaw. His breath hitched as he opened it. Inside were documents outlining scenarios to remove the CEO in the event of perceived instability, emotional volatility, or reputational risk. The documents cited criteria Ethan recognized, criteria he hadn't approved, criteria that matched him all too well. But the most damning file was a proposal dated 3 months earlier. It detailed a phased removal plan. Phase 1. Establish narrative of instability. Phase 2. Shift internal authority towards CFO and strategic partners. Phase 3. Reassign CEO to a founder emeritus role. Phase 4. Transfer executive control to interim leadership. Projected D. Knox. His stomach turned. She hadn't just planned to replace him. She intended to reduce him to a figurehead, someone with symbolic value, but no power. A decorative relic of the company's origin story. A founder removed from his own creation. Ethan stared at the words. His breathing became shallow. The fluorescent light above flickered, as if the room itself reacted to the revelation. The betrayal was now unmistakable. But one thing still troubled him. One question he hadn't yet answered. Why? Why would Lila go this far? Why destroy him publicly, professionally, and personally? He closed the documents and opened the legal archives. That's when he found it, a confidential memo regarding a potential merger with Knox Capital. The terms heavily favored the acquiring company Damien's. But there was a catch. Knox Capital required stable leadership during the transition. They required a CEO capable of public trust and strong corporate influence. They would not proceed if the CEO displayed emotional volatility. Ethan read that line 3 times. His humiliation at the anniversary gala, the emotional volatility, had not been an accident. It had been engineered, a deliberate play, a recorded, viral moment designed to demonstrate to the board that he was unstable, unfit to lead. It gave them the justification they needed to consider removing him. Lila hadn't spoken impulsively. She had spoken strategically. She had used the microphone. She had used the witnesses. She had used the moment. It wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. Ethan pushed back from the desk, breath ragged. He couldn't tell if he was shaking from anger, heartbreak, or horror. Maybe all of them. He stood and paced the room, running a hand through his hair. He replayed memories from their marriage, moments he once considered intimate or loving. Were they real? Were they rehearsed? Were they calculated? He felt something inside him crack, not the fragile crack of heartbreak, but a deeper one, a fracture in the narrative he had believed about his life, about his marriage, about himself. He was starting to see clearly. He was starting to wake up, and waking up meant questioning everything he had taken for granted. That was when he made the decision. He didn't want revenge. He didn't even want justice, not yet. He wanted truth. Truth would free him. Truth would protect him. Truth would rebuild him. He opened a new document and started writing notes, connecting timelines, tracing patterns, listing every anomaly he found. An investigation had begun, not the kind police handled, not the kind played out in courtrooms. This was the investigation of a life he thought he understood. He didn't know yet where it would lead, but he knew the first step. He would confront Damian Knox, not with rage, not with accusations, but with understanding. Only then would he know how deep the rot went. Before he closed his laptop, his eyes drifted back to the printed email on the floor. He's already showing signs of instability. He picked it up, stared at the words, and whispered to himself, "No, not anymore." Ethan stood taller than he had in weeks. Not healed, not whole, but awake. An awakening is the first step toward fighting back. The morning Ethan decided to fight back. The sky outside his window was still a deep shade of blue, not quite night and not yet morning. He hadn't slept. His mind throbbed from hours of uncovering betrayal, but beneath the exhaustion lay something sharp and unfamiliar. Resolve. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a faint pulse of control returning to him. Not enough to steady him completely, but enough to make him stand. He showered, dressed, and left the apartment before sunrise. The roads were nearly empty as he drove, the city still waking. He didn't head to the Nova Reach office. He wasn't ready to face Lila or Damien. Not without a plan. Instead, he found himself outside a small cafe, tucked between two office buildings. A place few people visited this early. He chose it because it was quiet, neutral, and because the person he was meeting preferred privacy. Victoria Lang was already there when he entered. She sat in a corner booth, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of her, her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she scrolled through something on her tablet. Victoria was in her early 60s, with silver hair she wore in an elegant twist. She had a sharp mind, sharper instincts, and a reputation for being brutally honest. She was one of the earliest board members to believe in Nova Reach, and one of the few who had always treated Ethan with respect, not as a figurehead or a pawn. She looked up the moment he approached. "My God," she whispered, standing quickly. "Ethan, you look broken," he offered with a hollow smile. "Wounded," she corrected gently, "but alive." They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe was nearly empty, except for a barista humming softly behind the counter. Ethan clasped his hands together, then unclasped them, then clasped them again. His nerves were fraying at the edges. Victoria reached across the table and rested her hand on his. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. Ethan didn't know where to begin. The anniversary gala, humiliation, the email chain, the leadership contingency plan, the hidden stock acquisitions, the whispered phone calls, the late-night meetings. Instead, he started with the question that had been echoing in him since Marcus left his apartment. How long has this been happening? Victoria's expression shifted subtle, but enough for Ethan to see that she already knew pieces of the truth. She set down her glasses. "Longer than you think." Ethan's stomach nodded. "What do you know?" Victoria exhaled, leaning back. "Enough to be concerned, enough to know you were being pushed out, but not enough to act. Lila and Damien have been very careful. They think they're the only ones who understand the game they're playing." Ethan swallowed hard. "And do you?" A faint smile curved her lips. "I've been playing corporate games longer than they've been alive." It was the first moment he felt a sliver of hope. Victoria picked up her coffee, swirling it thoughtfully. I've watched the patterns, the subtle shifts in voting blocks, the budget reallocations, the changes in how leadership meetings are documented. I suspected something was forming beneath the surface, but I don't make accusations without evidence. Ethan slid a printed email across the table. I have evidence now. She scanned it. Her expression darkened not with surprise, but with confirmation. So, it's as bad as I feared, she murmured. They're positioning you as incompetent, Ethan nodded. They've been collecting proof, framing my stress, my exhaustion, my emotional responses as instability, and the public humiliation, Victoria asked gently. I think it was intentional, Ethan said, voice cracking. Something they could point to as an example of my volatility. Victoria inhaled sharply. Ethan, I'm so sorry. He shook his head. He didn't want pity. Not anymore. I need to know what to do next, he said. First, Victoria replied, you need allies, people who will stand with you when things escalate. Who? He asked. Marcus, she said immediately. He's loyal, smart, observant, exactly the kind of person you need. Ethan nodded. Marcus had already proven that. Second, she continued, you need to secure copies of every relevant document, emails, transactions, board minutes. Store them offline, preferably in multiple places. I've already started. Good, she said, impressed. Third, and this will be the hardest, you must act like nothing is wrong. Ethan tensed. What? Victoria met his eyes with unflinching seriousness. If Lila suspects you know the full extent of her plan, she'll accelerate it. She'll push for your removal before you can defend yourself. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't anticipated that. So what do I do? He asked quietly. You pretend to crumble? She said. You act overwhelmed, passive, distracted. Let them believe their strategy is working. And then, she said, you gather enough evidence to bury them. The bluntness of her words startled him. Victoria had always been respected for her diplomacy, so hearing such decisive ruthlessness felt jarring, but also necessary. But Ethan, she added gently, you need to understand something. Standing up to them will require strength you haven't had to use before. You've spent years believing you needed Lila to define your worth. Now you have to believe in yourself without her. The words hit him harder than expected. He looked down, blinking away sudden heat behind his eyes. Do you think I can do this? He murmured. Victoria reached across the table again, gripping his hands with surprising firmness. Ethan, I've known you since the day you walked into a boardroom wearing a suit 3 sizes too big, she said, voice steady. You were terrified, shaking, but when you spoke about Nova Reach, the whole room fell silent. Not because of polish, not because of confidence, but because of truth. She squeezed his hands gently. You built this company from nothing. Not Lila, not Damien, you, and you are not the man they want to reduce you to. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His throat felt tight. Victoria leaned back, lifting her tablet. Now, let's talk logistics. They spent hours formulating a plan. Victoria mapped out vulnerabilities in the corporate structure, explained how board votes could shift, and identified legal pathways Ethan could use if things escalated to litigation. Many of the terms were complex, but she broke them down gently, helping him see where power actually lived within Nova Reach. By the end of their meeting, Ethan felt something strange, something he hadn't felt in months. Control. Not complete control. Not yet, but enough to breathe without drowning. When they finally stood to leave, Victoria touched his arm lightly. One more thing, she said. You may discover truths about Lila you're not prepared for. Ethan's voice grew small. Worse than what I already know. She hesitated. Different. He didn't know what that meant, and he didn't have the emotional capacity to ask. As he stepped into the morning light, Ethan inhaled deeply. The streets had grown busy. People moved with purpose, unaware of the silent war unfolding around him. He wasn't ready for everything ahead, but he was ready to begin. That alone felt like a small victory. On his way back to the car, he sent a message to Marcus. "We need to talk, today." For the first time since the gala, Ethan felt a spark in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something like it. The awakening had begun. Ethan had rehearsed what he would say during the emergency board meeting a dozen times in his mind. But nothing could prepare him for the moment he stepped into that glass-walled room. The atmosphere was electric, quiet but charged, like the seconds before a storm finally breaks. Every board member sat around the long table, some tapping pens, others scrolling through notes, all wearing expressions that tried and failed to mask their curiosity. They all knew about the anniversary gala. Everyone had seen the clip by now. The humiliation had spread across internal group chats, whispered through hallways, even leaked into the press. Ethan felt their eyes linger on him with a mix of pity and suspicion. The narrative had already begun to shift, just as Leela and Damien intended. Leela sat at the head of the table, elegant as ever, her posture perfect, her expression calm and composed. Damien sat 2 seats away, exuding practiced confidence. He offered Ethan a polite nod, the kind someone gives a man who's already lost. Anger flickered in Ethan's chest, but he swallowed it. Victoria's advice echoed in his mind. Don't show fight until you're ready to strike. Let them think you're weak. Weakness is camouflage. Ethan took his seat, without making eye contact. His hands shook slightly beneath the table, hidden from view. He wasn't ready for what this meeting might become, but he was ready enough. The board chair, an older man named Gregson, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. Given recent events, it's imperative we discuss the future of Nova Reach's leadership structure." Lila placed her fingertips together, nodding gracefully. "I agree, and I appreciate everyone's discretion during this sensitive time." Her voice was steady, professional, completely detached from the chaos she herself had created. Damien leaned forward. "We're concerned about stability," he began, directing his gaze toward the board rather than Ethan. "The CEO's emotional state has become a topic of public discussion. Investors are asking questions. Our reputation could be at risk." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "This isn't personal," Damien continued. "It's a matter of protecting the company." Lila sighed softly, as though the burden of leadership weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Ethan has always been the visionary behind our product, but vision alone doesn't guarantee consistency, not in a company of this size." The words were gentle. The intention behind them was not. Victoria, seated near the middle, tapped her pen, once a subtle signal Ethan recognized. "Stay calm. Wait." Gregson folded his hands. "We're not here to assign blame, but to evaluate whether a leadership shift might benefit Nova Reach. Temporarily, at least." There it was, the opening move. A few months ago, Ethan would have been blindsided, hurt, confused, desperate to defend himself. But today, despite the turmoil twisting inside him, he felt strangely grounded. The betrayal still cut deep, but now it was a wound he understood, rather than a surprise blow. He waited, letting them talk, letting the noose tighten. One by one, board members voiced concerns about public image, about investor confidence, about the incident at the gala. A few softened their criticism with pity. Others sounded almost rehearsed, echoing the language of Lila's confidential memos. Stability, emotional strain, professional image. Ethan saw the strategy clearly now, each phrase crafted to paint him as incapable, each word a brick in the case to remove him. When Gregson finally turned to him, the room grew quiet. "Ethan," he said gently, "we'd like to hear from you." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt every pair of eyes watching him, waiting to see if he'd crumple again. He inhaled slowly. "I appreciate the board's concern," he began, his voice a little unsteady but intentionally so. "I understand why recent events have raised questions. I haven't been myself lately." Lila's expression softened with false sympathy. Damien leaned back, satisfied. Ethan continued, "I take responsibility for my behavior at the gala. It was unprofessional, embarrassing. I won't deny that, he paused, letting silence stretch. But, he said quietly, there are things happening behind the scenes that you may not be aware of. The board members shifted in their seats. Lila's eyes narrowed just enough for Ethan to notice. Damien stopped tapping his pen. What do you mean? Gregson asked. Ethan lowered his gaze, giving the impression of a man hesitant to speak, vulnerable, conflicted. I've been under pressure I didn't fully understand until recently. Victoria gave a small nod, urging him on. He continued. There have been changes, structural changes implemented without my input, decisions made in my absence, financial adjustments I never approved. A ripple of confusion spread across the table. Gregson frowned. Damien tensed. Lila cleared her throat. Ethan, if you're suggesting... I'm suggesting nothing, Ethan interrupted gently. I'm just stating facts. He opened the folder he brought with him and slid several documents into the center of the table. Emails, financial transfers, strategic plans that contradicted official statements. I found these while reviewing internal records, he said softly. Documents outlining leadership restructuring, stock acquisitions, internal memos describing me as unstable. Months before the gala, a cold hush fell over the room. Lila's mask cracked for the first time only slightly, but enough for Ethan to catch the flicker of panic in her eyes. Damien's confidence evaporated. You're twisting what those documents mean, he said sharply. This is corporate procedure. Then why wasn't I informed? Ethan asked quietly, turning to him. Why does my own company contain plans for removing me? Plans drafted around incidents that hadn't happened yet. The board murmured. Tension tightened like wire. Victoria leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. I reviewed these documents myself. They raise serious questions about who is steering the company's direction and why. Lila's breath hitched. She composed herself quickly, but not quickly enough. Ethan is misunderstanding, she said, her tone strained. These documents were contingency plans, nothing more. Contingency plans, Victoria echoed, that reassigned the founder without his knowledge. Lila straightened. Ethan wasn't stable. We all saw the signs. Ethan finally looked at her, really looked at her, the woman he once loved, now a stranger wearing her face. He let the silence settle before he spoke. I wasn't unstable, he said softly. I was overwhelmed because the people I trusted most were hiding things from me. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't an accusation. It was the truth, and it cut deeper because of its softness. The board studied him, not as a fragile man, not as a liability, but as someone they had misjudged. Gregson rubbed his temples. We need a full investigation. Damien stiffened. Is that necessary? Victoria smiled faintly. Absolutely. The tide had shifted, but the twist had not yet come. Ethan took a deep breath and added, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for transparency. If the board decides I need support, I'll accept it. If you believe I should step aside temporarily, I'll consider it. But I won't be pushed out of the company I built based on manipulated narratives. A long, heavy silence followed. Finally, Gregson nodded. Until the investigation is complete, all restructuring efforts are frozen. Lila, Damien, you're suspended from making executive decisions pending review. Lila went pale. Damien's jaw clenched, and Ethan, who had entered the room expecting to be stripped of everything, sat there stunned, realizing the ground had shifted under their feet, not his. But just as he began to breathe again, Leela stood abruptly. Her voice trembled not with remorse, but with indignation. You're all being manipulated, she said sharply. Ethan isn't the victim you think he is. She turned to him, eyes blazing. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you were too weak to admit. Tell them. But whatever accusation she was about to unleash died on her tongue. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression twisted. Anger, fear, and something darker flickered through her eyes. For the first time, Ethan realized she wasn't just trying to save her position. She was terrified. terrified of what he might reveal next, and that fear told him there was more, much more. The meeting ended in chaos, board members whispering, Damien pacing, Lila storming out with shaking hands. Ethan remained in his seat for a long moment after everyone else left. He didn't feel victorious. He felt something deeper, the sense that the story he thought he understood had only just begun to unravel. When the boardroom finally emptied, Ethan stayed seated, staring at the polished table where only minutes earlier he'd laid out the evidence of his own betrayal. The documents were gone now, gathered by the board for review, but he could still feel the weight of them pressing into his palms. His heartbeat, which had pounded violently during the confrontation, now slowed into a numbed rhythm. He should have felt triumphant he had survived the ambush, exposed part of their plan, and forced an investigation. But victory didn't feel like this. It felt hollow, quiet, almost mournful, because exposing Leela meant acknowledging something far more painful, that the woman he once loved had been building a world without him long before he realized it. He exhaled shakily and rose from his seat. The board's security team escorted him out of the building through a private exit to avoid curious employees. He appreciated the gesture, even if it made him feel like a ghost moving through hallways he once owned. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, heavy and overcast. He pulled his coat tighter and walked to his car, feeling each step like he was wading through mud. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Messages from Marcus, missed calls from people he barely knew, a handful of reporters trying to sniff around the story, but none from Lila. He drove without thinking, letting muscle memory guide him. It wasn't until he pulled into the empty parking lot of a quiet riverside park that he realized where he'd gone, the place where he and Lila once spent an afternoon during the early days of Nova Reach. Celebrating their first real investor, they had bought cheap sandwiches and eaten them on a broken bench, laughing about how they'd tell this story someday. He sat there alone now, engine off, the silence loud. His hands shook slightly as he placed them on the steering wheel. He wasn't sure if it was anger, heartbreak, or disbelief. Maybe all three. The meeting had ended, with Leela trying to expose him to twist the narrative again, but something in her expression had startled him. She wasn't only defensive, she wasn't merely furious at being caught. She looked afraid, not of him, but of something he didn't yet understand. That thought lodged itself deep in him, scratching, pushing, demanding attention. What was she hiding? He didn't want to care anymore. He wanted to hate her, but hate was too clean, too distant. What he felt was messier, an aching mix of grief and unfinished questions. His phone buzzed again. This time, a name appeared that made him answer. Victoria. He picked up. I'm here. How are you holding up? She asked gently. I don't know, he admitted. That's normal, she said. Listen to me carefully, Ethan. What happened today was only the first layer. When people build lies this elaborate, they don't do it alone, and they don't do it without deeper motives. What deeper motives? Ethan asked, his voice cracking around the words. Victoria hesitated. I think Lila's reasons go beyond ambition. Like what? He pressed. Not over the phone, she said firmly. Come to my office tomorrow morning. And Ethan, brace yourself. The line clicked off. Ethan leaned back in the seat, staring through the windshield at the muddy river. Brace himself, as if he hadn't already been bracing for collapse for weeks. By the time evening fell, he forced himself to go home. He expected silence, emptiness. Maybe a lingering scent of Lila's perfume on a scarf she'd left draped over a chair. What he didn't expect was the living room light still turned on. His heart leapt and then stalled when he saw her. Lila sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on her knees, fingers pressed to her temples. She looked nothing like the composed executive at the board meeting. Her makeup smudged slightly under her eyes, hair pinned sloppily back, shoulders tense as if she'd been carrying the weight of the world alone. She looked up sharply when Ethan entered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Why are you here? Ethan finally asked, voice tight. I live here too, she said softly. That hasn't stopped you from disappearing before. Her lips tightened. Ethan, we need to talk. He swallowed. About what? Which part? The part where you humiliated me, framed me, planned to replace me, or maybe the part where you told the board I'm unstable. She flinched, a genuine flinch. I know how it looks, she said quietly. How it looks, he repeated, disbelieving. I read the documents, Lila. I saw the emails. You were planning this for months, if not years. Her gaze dropped. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. He let out a humorless laugh. Oh, was I supposed to be removed quietly? Without ever learning the truth? No, she whispered. You were never supposed to be hurt. His breath caught, anger flaring hotter. Then what was I supposed to be? Lila, a placeholder, a puppet. A story you could shape however you wanted. She didn't answer. Ethan stepped closer, voice trembling. Why, Lila? Just tell me why. For the first time in years, she looked small, not composed, not powerful, just a woman cornered by her own choices. When we met, she began, voice barely audible, you were brilliant but fragile. And I thought, if I could help you become the man I saw in you, everything would fall into place. For you, for the company, for us. That's not help, Ethan said hoarsely. That's control. She shut her eyes, pain flickering across her face. I didn't mean it to be, but it was. Insus. Silence thickened between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Ethan asked the question he feared the most. Was any of it real? Us. Our marriage. Lila's eyes filled with something he couldn't decipher: sorrow, regret, guilt, maybe all of them. Yes, she whispered. At least, I think it was. In the beginning. In the beginning, Ethan repeated. She swallowed hard. I cared for you. I admired you. But somewhere along the way, admiration became responsibility. And responsibility became fear. Fear of what? He asked. That you'd fall apart, she said, voice trembling. That everything we built would collapse if I didn't hold it together. He stared at her, stunned. She wasn't afraid of losing the company. She was afraid of losing control. And Damien, he asked. Lila's jaw clenched. Damien is opportunistic. He wanted power. I needed structure. It was never personal. It was never personal. Lila's jaw clenched. Ethan's stomach twisted. You chose him over me? No, she whispered. I chose the version of you I thought you could become. The version I tried to create. And when you didn't fit the mold, when you were human, emotional, imperfect, I didn't know how to love you without fixing you. Her confession sliced through him. Painful, honest, devastating. So, this is my fault, he murmured, because I wasn't the man you imagined. No, she said quickly, tears gathering in her eyes, because I didn't know how to let you be the man you already were. For a moment, Ethan saw the woman he once loved, but the damage was too deep to be soothed by tears or regret. You need to leave, he said quietly. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I'll go. She stood, hesitating as if she wanted to say more, but then she left. Closing the door softly behind her, Ethan exhaled, feeling something inside him break. Not sharply, but slowly, like a rope finally snapping after years of strain. He sank onto the couch, staring at the empty doorway. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he understood something painfully clear. Lila hadn't destroyed him out of hatred. She had destroyed him out of fear. Fear-born control, control-born obsession, obsession-born betrayal. It didn't excuse anything. It didn't heal anything. But it revealed a truth he wasn't expecting. The villain in his life wasn't a monster. She was a broken person, trying to fix someone who was never broken. And tomorrow, when the investigation began, he would have to decide whether truth or justice mattered more. The next morning, Ethan woke with a heaviness that felt different from the days before. Not the crushing weight of heartbreak, nor the sharp sting of betrayal, but something quieter, like the ache that settles in after a wound has stopped bleeding. He lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city waking up outside his window. Lila was gone, truly gone this time. No scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway, no half-drunk cup of coffee on the counter, no soft footsteps passing by the bedroom door. For the first time in years, the apartment belonged entirely to him. The space felt bigger, emptier, unfamiliar, like he had moved into someone else's life by accident. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. Today wasn't about her. Today was about survival and clarity, and maybe if he could manage it, healing. He wasn't sure how to begin. The meeting with Victoria weighed on his mind. She had told him to brace himself, and that warning lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. There was more truth to unravel, more deception to uncover, and he didn't know if he was strong enough to face it, but he didn't have a choice anymore. If he didn't take control of his life, someone else always would. He showered, dressed simply, and walked outside. The cold morning air hit him like a reset button, forcing his scattered thoughts into some semblance of order. He stopped by a corner cafe, the kind he used to frequent before his world became polished and curated under Lila's influence. The barista greeted him without recognition. It was oddly comforting to be unseen again. When he arrived at Victoria's office, she was already waiting for him. Her space reflected her personality, minimalist yet warm, filled with books, old board meeting photos, and a lone plant she claimed she kept alive out of pure spite. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit, Ethan." He obeyed, nerves prickling under his skin. Victoria studied him for a long moment before speaking. "How did things go last night?" He hesitated. "Leela came home." Victoria's brows lifted, not in surprise, but in confirmation. "And?" Ethan exhaled slowly. She tried to explain. "I don't know if it mattered. I don't know what was truth and what was manipulation anymore." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "That's normal. Betrayal blurs everything." He swallowed. "You said there was more I needed to know." "Yes." She opened a folder on her desk. "And I need you to stay calm." Ethan braced himself as she slid a document toward him. It was a donor list. Large firms, investment groups, strategic partners, and highlighted among them were several entities connected to Damien. "I already saw this," Ethan said. Damien was accumulating shares. Victoria shook her head. "Not just shares. Influence." She tapped one name. "This shell company. It's linked to a private network known for funding aggressive takeovers. They're not subtle, and they don't gamble." Ethan frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," she said quietly, "someone guaranteed them a return." His chest tightened. "Guaranteed. As in, promised that the company would be theirs." "Yes." He stared at her. "Who?" Victoria looked him dead in the eye. "Lila." The room spun for a moment. Ethan gripped the armrests of the chair, grounding himself. "No," he whispered. "Why would she?" "She didn't do it for the money," Victoria said. "She did it to secure power, to ensure she'd remain in control no matter who held the title of CEO. Ethan closed his eyes, fighting the urge to break. "But she told me. She said she never meant for any of this to hurt me." Victoria let out a long exhale. "Lila believes she's protecting you. In her mind, control equals love. The more she controls, the more she thinks she's saving you from yourself." Ethan felt something inside him tear quietly, painfully. "That's not love." "No," Victoria said gently. "It's fear. Fear disguised as devotion." He rubbed his face. "So what now? What happens to her, to Damien, to the board?" "That depends on you," Victoria said. "We can pursue legal action, file for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, manipulation, coercion. You have enough evidence to destroy both of them professionally." The word destroy echoed through him, heavy and sharp. "And you?" Victoria added. "You could reclaim full control of Novareach, reinstate your authority, clear your name entirely. He didn't respond. She leaned forward. You deserve justice, Ethan. He looked down at his hands. Justice? What did justice even mean now? Would crushing Lila fix what she'd broken inside him? Would humiliating Damien erase the years of manipulation? Would reclaiming power heal the part of him that once believed he wasn't enough? Or would revenge simply tether him to the same darkness that had consumed her? He didn't know, but he knew he couldn't make that decision yet, not without understanding himself first. Before I decide anything, he said softly, I need to understand why I let all of this happen. Victoria lowered her voice. You trusted her. No, Ethan said. I depended on her. The admission hurt more than he expected. He continued, voice breaking. All my life, I believed I wasn't enough, not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. And when Lila came into my life, she didn't just build a company with me. She built a story where she was the savior and I was the broken thing she rescued. I let that narrative replace my own. Victoria listened in silence. I let her shape me, Ethan whispered, because I didn't know how to shape myself. A long pause. Then Victoria said gently, then maybe it's time you learned. That afternoon, Ethan drove aimlessly, ending up at a quiet lakeside park. He got out of the car and sat on a bench, watching ripples form on the water. The air was cold. A soft breeze tugged at his coat. He replayed moments from his past, the nights coding in his rundown apartment, the first investor pitch, the day he registered Nova Reach, the early sparks of hope. Back then, he had dreams untouched by anyone else's expectations. He had fire, he had purpose, he wondered when he'd lost it, when he traded his identity for validation, when he mistook guidance for destiny. A noise pulled him from his thoughts. Someone had approached quietly, a woman with dark hair tied back loosely. Wearing a simple coat and carrying a folder, he recognized her instantly. Amelia Reyes, the head of HR. He stood slowly. Amelia. She offered a small, hesitant smile. Marcus told me where you were. He nodded. Is something wrong? No, she said, stepping closer. But something is unfinished. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Amelia hesitated, then handed him the folder. These are personal HR reports. Documented patterns of behavior. Concerns raised by employees. He tensed. About me? No, she said. About Lila. And Damien. He swallowed hard. Why are you giving this to me? Because the truth doesn't just belong to those who weaponize it, she replied softly. It belongs to the people who survive it too. Something warm flickered in Ethan's chest. Gratitude, connection, hope. He hadn't felt those in a long time. Amelia stepped back, her eyes gentle. You're not alone in this, Ethan. Not anymore. After she left, Ethan sat on the bench again. The folder beside him. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the cold wind wash over him. He had allies now. He had truth. He had choice. And slowly, painfully, he was beginning to reclaim something he'd forgotten he possessed, himself. The courthouse was colder than Ethan expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The tall marble pillars, the sterile lighting, the faint echo of footsteps down long corridors, everything felt designed to remind people of the gravity of what happened within these walls. Truth was exposed here. Lives were redefined here, and today, his marriage and career would be dissected in front of strangers sworn to neutrality. He sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Victoria sat to his left, calm and composed, her expression unreadable. His attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Sienna Grant, flipped through documents with quiet efficiency. Across the aisle sat Lila. Even in this harsh environment, she looked polished hair, pulled into a sleek bun, tailored suit immaculate. But there was something different in her posture, a slight stiffness, a tremor she tried to hide. Her attorney whispered something, but she wasn't listening. She kept her eyes on Ethan, searching his face for What? Anger, fear, forgiveness. He didn't know anymore. Damien was seated a few spots away from her, attempting to maintain his trademark confidence. But even from a distance, Ethan could see the crack's tightened jaw, restless fingers tapping against his leg, eyes darting toward the judge, as if expecting a verdict before the trial even began. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He wondered if he looked as nervous as he felt. He wondered if Lila could see the grief still lingering under his resolve. The case wasn't labeled Ethan Cole versus Lila Hart and Damian Knox. It was officially a dispute of corporate governance, breach of fiduciary duty, and manipulation of company assets. Legally clean, emotionally catastrophic, the proceedings began with formalities, evidence submissions, corporate documentation. It felt almost unreal, like his life had been turned into a series of bullet points and exhibits. When Damien took the stand first, Ethan found himself holding his breath. Damien straightened his suit jacket and spoke with the polished charm that had once made investors trust him instantly. "Everything I did was in the best interest of Nova Reach," he said with rehearsed calm. Mr. Cole exhibited signs of emotional instability that threatened the company. Sienna stood. "Can you define emotional instability?" Damien smirked slightly. He was reactive, sensitive, easily overwhelmed, traits unsuitable for a CEO. "Examples," she pressed. "The gala incident speaks for itself," he replied. Sienna tilted her head. "You mean the incident where his wife publicly humiliated him?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Damien's jaw flexed. "Personal matters aside." "There is no aside, Mr. Knox." Sienna interrupted. "You used that moment to justify a premeditated takeover. Isn't that correct?" Damien's face reddened. "That's a gross exaggeration." "Really?" Sienna lifted a stack of printed emails. Exhibit D. Internal communications between you and Ms. Hart discussing strategies for removing Mr. Cole dated months before the gala. Gasps. Even the judge's eyes sharpened. Damien's composure cracked. Those were contingency plans, standard. Contingency plans that explicitly depict Mr. Cole as unfit. Sienna cut in. Plans drafted before any supposed instability. Plans you knew he would never approve. Plans that benefited you. Damien's silence was telling. Ethan watched, pulse pounding. It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt necessary, but not liberating. Like cutting away infected skin so the body could heal. Next was Leela. When she took the stand, something in Ethan twisted painfully. She still avoided looking at him directly. Maybe out of shame, maybe fear, maybe both. Her attorney questioned her first. "Ms. Hart, did you intend to harm Mr. Cole's reputation?" "No," she said softly. "Never." "Did you believe Mr. Cole was emotionally unstable?" She hesitated, long enough for Ethan to feel his chest tighten. "I believed," she said finally, "that he was struggling. I thought he needed structure. Support. Protection. Protection." Sienna echoed, rising to cross-examine. "Is that why you helped orchestrate his removal without telling him?" Lila swallowed. "I was trying to protect the company." "By undermining the founder?" Sienna asked, voice sharp. "By controlling his access, rewriting his role, and creating a narrative where he appeared incompetent." "It wasn't like that," Lila whispered. "Then explain." Sienna pushed. Lila looked down. He doubted himself constantly. He relied on me for everything. I didn't want him to collapse under pressure." Sienna stepped closer. "And humiliating him publicly, was that for his benefit too?" A tear slipped down Lila's cheek. "That was an accident. Yet you never apologized until after being confronted." Sienna's tone was controlled, almost surgical. "Isn't it true, Miss Hart, that you were afraid of losing power? Not afraid of losing your husband?" Lila's breath caught. For the first time, she looked up, straight at Ethan. Her eyes shimmered. "No," she whispered. "I was afraid of losing both." A pin-drop silence settled over the courtroom. Ethan felt something inside him break open: grief, anger, longing, exhaustion, all tangled together. Sienna continued. You manipulated corporate narratives. You signed off on hidden transactions. You coordinated with Mr. Knox to alter leadership structures without the CEO's knowledge. Do you deny any of that? Lila closed her eyes. No. Why? Sienna asked simply. Lila opened her eyes again. This time, her voice cracked. Because I didn't believe Ethan could survive losing the company. So I convinced myself that I had to control it for him. I thought I was protecting him from himself, and instead, I destroyed everything. Her confession echoed in the silent room. Ethan felt tears burn behind his eyes. Not because her words healed anything, but because they confirmed a truth he'd been terrified to name. Lila hadn't broken him out of hatred. She had broken him out of fear masked as love. And fear is a dangerous foundation for power. When Ethan finally took the stand, his hands shook slightly. He wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to retaliate. He was there to tell the truth. Sienna kept her voice soft. Mr. Cole, do you believe your wife ever loved you? Ethan took a long breath. I believe she loved the idea of me. The version she could fix. The version she could manage. But not the version that existed. Did you ever feel safe in your marriage? Another breath. I felt needed, and I confused that with being loved. And now? Sienna asked. Ethan glanced at Lila. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Now I know the difference. Murmurs swept through the courtroom. Lila stared down at her hands. The judge finally spoke, summarizing the evidence. Breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation, concealed acquisitions, unethical restructuring. The verdict wasn't final yet, but the recommendation was clear. Lila and Damien would be stripped of their roles, investigated further, and barred from influencing Nova Reach leadership decisions. But then came the part no one expected. Mr. Cole, the judge said, you have the right to pursue personal damages. Given the emotional and reputational harm, the court would likely rule in your favor. Ethan looked at Lila, her trembling hands, her haunted expression. He looked at Damien, defensive, angry, unrepentant. Then he closed his eyes. When he opened them, he spoke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. I won't pursue damages. The room erupted in whispers. The judge raised an eyebrow. Are you certain? Ethan nodded. Yes. Removing them from power is enough. Destroying their lives won't rebuild mine. Lila gasped quietly. Damien stared, stunned. Sienna turned to him in shock, but also with something like admiration. As he stepped down from the stand, Victoria whispered, that was a choice only a strong man could make. But Ethan didn't feel strong. He felt free. For the first time in a long time. Not victorious, not vindicated, just free. Months passed after the courtroom showdown, but the echoes of it lingered in Ethan's life, like the fading hum of a long, violent storm. Not gone, not forgotten, just quieter, the kind of quiet that comes after something has finally broken and the pieces begin, slowly, quietly, to settle. Nova Reach changed after the investigation. So did Ethan. Damien Knox vanished quickly from the corporate world, his reputation unraveling once the truth spread through the industry. He fought back initially, issuing public statements, disclaiming responsibility, blaming Lila, claiming ignorance. But emails don't lie, and neither do financial trails. Eventually, even he understood the inevitable. Lila's fall was different, quieter, more personal, more painful. She withdrew from the spotlight entirely. News outlets speculated. Employees whispered. Acquaintances pretended sympathy while enjoying the scandalous novelty of her downfall. But Lila didn't appear in interviews or attempt public redemption. She disappeared into the shadows of her own making. Ethan rarely thought about Damien, but he thought about Lila more than he wanted to admit, not because he longed for her, not because he hated her, but because he was finally confronting the truth of their marriage, what it had been, what it hadn't been. and most importantly, why he had stayed so long in something that was slowly suffocating him. The company was now under Ethan's leadership again, though not in the way it had been before. He no longer tried to be everything to everyone. He no longer performed a version of himself he thought people needed. He no longer bowed under the pressure to seem invincible. Marcus often joked, "It's nice having an actual human as a CEO." Ethan laughed every time, because for the first time, the joke felt true. Novareach didn't just heal, it transformed. Ethan created an internal culture program focused on emotional well-being, transparency, and personal growth. Employees, many of whom had silently suffered under the previous power dynamics, began opening up. Productivity increased. Creativity exploded. Laughter returned to the office floors. But even as the company flourished, Ethan felt something unresolved tugging at him. A question lingering at the edges of his mind. Was he ready to let go of everything that came before? Or was he still carrying pieces of Lila's voice inside him, doubt disguised as memory? He found his answer unexpectedly. During a quiet evening in the break room, Amelia Reyes entered, holding a stack of HR files, pausing when she saw Ethan sitting alone at the table, staring at an old Novareach prototype board. She smiled gently. "You're here late again." "Not working," Ethan said. "Just thinking." "That's usually heavier than working," she replied. He chuckled softly, grateful for her presence. Amelia had become a steady, grounding force. In the months after the investigation, a quiet companion who understood that healing wasn't linear and didn't require constant conversation. She sat across from him. "What is it this time?" Ethan hesitated. "Do you ever wonder how much of who you are is shaped by the people who hurt you?" "Sometimes," she said, then added, "But I try to remind myself that pain may shape me, but it doesn't get to define me." Ethan absorbed that. She leaned closer. "You've changed, Ethan, but not in the way she tried to change you. This time, you chose the direction." He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was right. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It didn't announce itself. It simply walked in quietly one day and took a seat beside him. Weeks later, Ethan woke one Saturday and felt the urge to revisit the old Riverside Park, the place where he'd once argued with hope and grief in equal measure. The air was warm with early spring, sunlight shimmering on the water. He sat on the same bench as before, this time with a sense of peace he didn't expect. But he wasn't alone for long. He heard footsteps approaching, slow and hesitant. When he looked up, his breath caught. Lila. She wore no makeup, no designer suit, just a simple sweater and jeans. She looked smaller, softer, human in ways she'd never allowed herself to be before. "Hi, Ethan," she said quietly. He nodded. "Hi." She sat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "Thank you for not ruining me." Ethan inhaled deeply. "I didn't do it for you." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. That's why it means more." He didn't respond. After a moment, she continued, "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did." He looked at her, surprised. She offered a sad smile. "Turns out manipulating people into versions I can control isn't love. It's fear wrapped in superiority." He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't say anything cruel. He didn't have to, she continued, voice breaking. "I loved you, Ethan. I really did. But I didn't know how to love someone without also trying to manage them. You didn't need fixing, but I needed to fix something to feel worthy." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not just for the takeover, not just for the public humiliation, but for every time I made you shrink so I could feel tall." The wind rustled the branches above them. Ethan looked at the river, eyes soft with something like acceptance. "I forgive you," he said finally. Lila gasped, covering her mouth. "But," Ethan added gently, "forgiving you doesn't mean I want you back. It means I'm ready to move forward." She nodded slowly, tears streaming freely now. "That's fair." They sat in silence again. But it wasn't painful this time. It was closure, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but releases its grip. After a moment, Lila stood. I'm leaving the city for a while. Maybe start over somewhere quiet. I don't know yet. Ethan nodded. Take care of yourself. You too, she whispered. She walked away without looking back, and Ethan watched her go, feeling nothing but calm. Later that night, he returned to the Nova Reach building. The lobby lights were dim, the air still. He rode the elevator to the top floor, stepped into his office, and gazed at the city stretching endlessly before him. A light knock sounded on the door. Amelia stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of tea. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. He smiled softly. Not tonight. She handed him a mug, then leaned against the window beside him. They looked out at the skyline, comfortable in the quiet. After a long moment, Ethan said, I'm not the man I used to be. Amelia sipped her tea. Good. The man you're becoming is better. He felt warmth bloom in his chest, not from the tea, but from something far deeper. Not romance, not attachment, but possibility. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel small, didn't feel broken, didn't feel like someone who needed saving. He felt like someone standing in his own story again. And as he looked out over the city alive, unpredictable, full of future, he whispered to himself, I'm finally free. In the end, Ethan's journey reminds us of one of life's most painful yet powerful truths. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who break us, not out of cruelty, but out of their own fears, wounds, and unmet expectations. Healing doesn't come from revenge or proving our worth. It comes from choosing ourselves again, from realizing we are not defined by the versions of us others try to control, reshape, or diminish. The real victory is not winning the battle. It's reclaiming your voice, your identity, your peace. Healing begins the moment you decide that your story belongs to you, and you alone. If Ethan's story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more powerful stories like this.